Can I ask you to settle in, settle down? Thank you. Welcome to Politics and Prose Bookstore. My name is Sarah, and I'm a bookseller here at Politics and Prose, where we host a range of in-store events along with classes and trips. Before we get started today, I'd like to ask you to please silence your cell phone so as not to disrupt the event. And when we get to the Q&A portion, please line up at the microphone next to the poll to ask your questions. Tonight, I am very excited to welcome Martha Anne Toll, celebrating the release of Duet for One. Martha Anne, yay! Martha Anne Toll's debut novel, Three Muses, was shortlisted for the Gotham Book Prize and won the Petrichor Prize for Finely Crafted Fiction. A book critic for NPR and the Washington Post, Toll had a career in social justice after training as a classic viola player. She serves on Penn Faulkner Foundation's board and lives in Washington. Duet for One is Toll's second novel. Toll will be in conversation with Anne Midgette. Former classical music critic of the Washington Post, she has also written for the Wall Street Journal, Opera News, the Los Angeles Times, Town and Country, Art News, and others. So please join me in welcoming tonight's guests.
Wow, what a beautiful crowd. It's so nice to see you. Thank you. Thank you to Sarah and Elida at Politics and Prose, and thank you to all of you who are here and have traveled and come from wherever. It's great. Thank you. So what we're going to do tonight is share some of the music in this book and then have a conversation. But before I do that, one logistic, we want you all to come party with us after the event. It's literally just across the street. It's called I'm Eddie Cano's. We're going to have cake and wine and all those good things, so please join us. Okay, so first I want to acknowledge that we are in a very trying and difficult moment in our country, and we hope to create an oasis of beauty and calm for you tonight. Duet for One is a musical love story, and it opens with the death of a pianist named Adele Pearl. She is the wife of Victor Pearl, and they are a duo piano team that is celebrated the world over. So Victor is recognizing that he has not only lost his spouse, he's lost his entire musical career. But their son, Adam, who's a professional violinist, is having a different set of feelings. He's thinking, Mom was never there for me. The book is really Adam's journey toward love and toward trying to figure out what does his grief mean and how does he process this. So I'm going to read a few very short selections, and then we're going to hear some of the music from the book. This is the very first scene on page 1. Adele Pearl was dead, vanquished by ovarian cancer. Adam and Victor shivered at her graveside. Adam was 37 when his mother died. He was a violinist known for fluidity and grace. Victor was Adam's father, the surviving half of Pearl and Pearl, a world-renowned two-piano team and joint faculty for the piano at Philadelphia's Caldwell Institute of Music. Out of the corner of his eye, Adam watched Philip Hissel hurry downhill. Hissel tripped, then bent to pick up his fedora from the damp, muddy ground. Instinctively, Adam moved closer to his father, although Hissel was too far away to create a disturbance. For this small knot of mourners, time paused and music slept. For Victor, Adele's death was a black hole that sucked in music. For Adam, a numbness. Adam goes to the Shiva at his father's house, and then he comes home and he takes out his violin, which is his way of giving himself comfort. So this is him just being alone in his studio apartment in Philadelphia on an upper floor, just taking out his violin to comfort himself. For company, Adam has his violin, a gleaming molasses-brown Guanini with ebony accessories. He slid off its blue satin bag, pressed on a practice mute to avoid being heard, and walked to his music stand. A few stars twinkled in concert with the lights on the Ben Franklin Bridge. He opened the sheet music for the Bach sonatas and partitas. Bare-chested, Adam played facing the expansive picture windows. His breathing was inseparable from the sweep of his right arm. He gave himself over to the music with the tenderness of a lover. Chords punctuated melody as haunting as death. As he played, he recalled Dara standing outside his practice room all those summers ago, listening to him play Bach. At the time, Adam had been playing to center himself, which had to do with Dara. Dara's listening in felt like an invitation, hers to him, despite her embarrassment at being caught. Tonight, he saw that he had been too young for this music. A lone violinist with solo and accompanist, conductor and orchestra. Tonight, the sonata erected scaffolding for grief. And this is the scene that Adam is remembering where he's at a summer music program and he meets Dara, who's in her practice room. This is their first meeting. Well, not really their first meeting, but one of their first meetings. And this is again a reference to the Bach that you're about to hear. Dara grabbed a donut and orange juice and headed to her Briarly practice room. Her case was open by 7:15 a.m. She played 45 minutes of left-hand exercises, followed by 45 minutes for her right hand. Moving her bow slowly across the strings, Dara owned her morning practice space. This was where she tried to produce warm, fat sounds. The campus slept while she crawled through Sebchik. No one would tolerate the tedium of an hour and a half of Sebchik this early. So she was taken aback when she heard violin chords next door. Not technical etudes, but music penetrating the wall. Maybe it was two violinists practicing a duet. The sounds were so complex. Dara sat down, set her viola upright in her lap, and closed her eyes. On the other side of the wall was enchantment, a pure, clean sound, no scratches, no bumps. Finally, she could no longer contain her curiosity. She pushed open the door to her practice room and peeked through the plexiglass door next to her. A tall young man stood with his back to her, facing his music stand. He was engrossed in his playing, barely watching the notes go by. Adele Pearl. He was on to the second movement, a fugue with double stops, chords that produced the sound of several instruments. His rib cage expanded in time to the fugue, in and out, rhythmically aligned with the music. His extending bow arm gave the illusion that his body filled the whole practice cubicle. At the end of the third movement, sensing someone watching, Adam turned around. It didn't occur to Dara to move. She wanted to hear more, but he had seen her and was opening his door. "What are you doing here?" Dara was crimson, listening. She tugged her braid. "Practicing, but I had to stop when I heard you. Only I didn't know it was you. I just had to hear the music." She'd been caught. "It was great. What was it?" Adam laughed. "Bach." So now it is my thank you. Thank you. Now it is my pleasure to introduce Kimberly Galva, a violinist who's going to play the third movement, which is the Andante movement from Bach's Sonata No. 2 for solo violin. Kimberly has played with a highly selective Chicago Civic Orchestra under conductors Daniel Barenboim, Pierre Boulez, Mstislav Rostropovich, Pinchas Zuckerman, and John Adams. She makes her home now in Washington, where she maintains a home studio and teaches at the Levine School of Music. And we are just quickety-quick going to move our chairs sideways so she has room. Please welcome her. Thank you so much, Kimberly. Okay, I'm going to rearrange the furniture. Okay.
Turn on my screen. Well, that was lovely. Is this on? Yes. That was lovely. And thank you so much for letting me be part of this. Congratulations on bringing out your book. As somebody in the throes of finishing my own first novel, I am watching with the mixture of pride and terror, my own, and you're extremely inspiring. So thank you. And it was really great to hear music because this book is so steeped in music. And obviously, writing about music is a huge challenge, as I, as a former music critic, know very well. How did you approach that part of the assignment? And is there a Spotify playlist?
To tell you the truth, there is, but it's in my head right now. But it's going to be on Spotify this week, I hope. I haven't had a minute to breathe. But yes, there will be a Spotify playlist. How did I approach it? Well, when I first started writing, this was a goal of mine to get music on the page. And it's really hard to do. So I guess I have several thoughts. One is you've got to throw out any vocabulary you ever use to talk about music, because on the page it's usually pretty boring. And the second thing is, I thought the only way that I could really communicate what it means to be a musician is through the physicality of practicing, to put the reader into the character's body, talk about the calluses and the fact that you have to rosin your bow to warm up, and what it sounds like if it's not right in your ear, or if you're sitting in the orchestra in the viola section in particular, your ears are getting blasted out by the oboe section and the trombones right behind you, and just to try to do some of the physicality.
Yep. I was going to say one of the things you get from this is the perspective of professional musicians rather than the audience. This is not a roman à clef, and yet some of the characters were inspired by real people. Although the main characters are not. Can you talk a little bit about the inspiration? I believe Adele was based on Lillian Kallir. Is that correct?
So I always say that novels have multiple inspirations. So one inspiration for this novel is I opened the New York Times in 2004 to see that Lillian Kallir had died. She's a very well-known Czech emigre pianist, married to Claude Frank, another probably more famous pianist. And my first thought when I saw the obituary was, what's he going to do? They play as a piano team together. What's he going to do? And so that is what really sparked the entire novel. I didn't research them because it's not about them. And then within the novel, the viola teacher, Isaac Korov, is based on my beloved mentor and viola teacher in Philadelphia, Max Aronoff, to whom the book is dedicated. Max was a force of nature and changed my life in all kinds of ways.
You said that you didn't base it on Lillian Kallir. Did you look at all into her life when you were making Adele? Adele seems like a very different kind of character.
Yeah, I don't actually know very much about Lillian Kallir, but I had heard her play. I think that she was with me at age 14. I went to a summer music school that had Juilliard and Curtis faculty. It was in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, and I know that she was there, and I know that I heard her play. But other than that, no, I didn't do any research. Not on her. Sorry.
Lillian Kallir once said to me in an interview that, Lillian Kallir's student said to me in an interview that Lillian Kallir had told her that she should have a kid and not just focus on music. And it was really kind of wonderful to know that she was the inspiration for this character who had a very complicated relationship to her child. That was Wu Han, by the way, David Finkel's wife.
Interesting.
I'm going to jump ahead because both Adele and Isaac, the characters based on Max, have a lot of power over young musicians. And a real theme of this book is the kind of power that people in positions of authority have. You don't go into literal Me Too in terms of sexual assault, but you do show how toxic and difficult that can be. And I wondered, is that something you set out to address? Is it something that came up? Is it so pervasive in music that you can't avoid it?
Well, it's pretty pervasive in music. I wasn't really aiming to write about it, but I have a lot of horror stories. We could spend a different evening talking about them. But in my case with Max, I met him when I was 14, and he was in his 70s then. He was my grandfather's age, and he had a very imposing manner, but mostly he was very funny and he had an incredible gift of the gab. But what he had more than anything else were two things. He had the most beautiful viola, and his sound is better than any violist I've ever heard. He had an extraordinary sound, extraordinary. He was in the first class, graduating class at Curtis, and he helped found the Curtis String Quartet. But he also had something that almost no other music teacher has, even though you would be surprised if you're not a musician to know this. He knew how to teach you how to practice. And that's a great failing in the music world, that we don't learn how to practice, because in order to master an instrument, you have to be able to break it down and do it. So
true. Yeah.
those were the two things.
Yeah. Isaac in the book is a benevolent figure of power, but there are also toxic figures of power. Is that something that you researched, thought about? Does it come to you?
No, that's my personal experience. So there's a toxic viola teacher named Philip Hissel, who's sort of the opposite, who was not, that's not his name, but he was a real character in my life, who probably was, he was certainly sadistic, he was probably misogynist as well, because I think he only really picked on women, where he would favor you and then just turn on you on a dime, like kind of a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Unfortunately, the music world is full of these people.
Yeah.
But he's the only one I really had direct contact with.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, at least your book didn't go into the sexual harassment side of it all. But one other striking thing about the book, each character gets a place in the sun, but there's a lot of focus on the figure of Victor and some on Isaac. And to have two elderly men centered so much in the book is an interesting choice. And I wondered how you thought about that. It's not just a simple love story of two young people, it's also a love story of two older people.
So I love that question, because Victor is the husband of Adele, and he's widowed at the graveside. And early editors asked me to please get rid of him. No reader is going to want to read about an older man. But I thought he was pretty important. So I was really interested in his grief and how he processed it, because he had to deal with living as a solo man, but he also had to reinvent his career.
He's a wonderful character. He's like my favorite character.
That's nice to know.
He's also so dapper. He's always getting himself together. It's
that Viennese background.
Yeah. Another trope of the classical music world is that the older generation is always more colorful than the younger generation, and all the stories that we hear of the past and these amazing greats. And this really is a theme of the book also, as Adam struggles to define himself against these enormous parents. Again, is that something that you thought about? That Adele and Victor are the most colorful, charismatic, amazing people.
This is a really interesting question. No, I did not think about it, but it was only as I was writing this book, and quite recently, that I realized that musicians of my generation were trained by especially in Philadelphia or New York, were trained by the best classical musicians in Europe. Many of them were Holocaust refugees. Lillian Clear was, and so was Claude Frank. She was Czech and he was Austrian, I believe. Max was a Philadelphian, but he had this wall of photographs, and he studied with Karl Flesch, who was Jewish and went back to the Netherlands in the 30s to give master classes and was incarcerated. Somebody was able to save his life. But that generation of musicians, some of them went to Hollywood and became musical composers. So they were really colorful. They were foreigners. I mean, in the best sense of the word, they all had stories. And like other apprenticeship professions, you mark your music teacher with who he studied with. So you don't say I studied with Max Aronoff, you say I studied with Max Aronoff, who studied with Karl Flesch, who studied with somebody. I don't know if it's Paganini or somebody famous, I don't know.
Yeah, Leon Fleischer used to joke about being in this line of Beethoven, but that Beethoven had a couple of very promiscuous students. And I turned to him and said, yeah, that would be you, Leon, who have been teaching for 60 years. But yeah, the pedigree is important. You start right out in the book by contrasting these big universal topics like death. They started the graveside and classical music and the bigness of it all with just the mundane things like cleaning up the glasses after the Shiva. And you have two passages very close together of the sound of Adele's shoes coming in and the sound of Adam's shoes. And I wondered if, again, that was a deliberate sort of contrast of big sounds against mundane sounds, or that sound is what introduces a person, or is that just a byproduct of the
It's
writing?
just a byproduct, but I did a lot of thinking about what it felt like to Adam as a child growing up, because his mother went out every night to perform. She wasn't around very much. So part of that scene is written from his perspective as a child. He had a live-in nanny named Bella, and he remembers her leaving for concerts. He remembers waiting by the elevator for her to come home. And his favorite thing to do was lie under her soundboard where he could get close to her. But that's not really close if you think about it.
Did you base that at all on Christoph Eschenbach?
No, tell me more. No, I don't know.
Christoph Eschenbach, as a child, was separated from his parents who were killed in the war, and he didn't speak. He was taken in by a cousin. I think he was in a camp, or in a detention camp anyway. He was taken out, and he was like 4 years old, and he didn't speak. And for years, he didn't speak, but she taught piano, and he sat under the piano. And then he came out one day speaking and playing the piano. And
fascinating.
And became Christoph Eschenbach.
Wow.
But I guess you didn't base it on that.
Well, maybe I was channeling him.
Exactly. Adam is a more gregarious figure than Christoph Eschenbach, yes. I think.
Yeah.
And he has more hair. Wait, what am I going to ask you? How does the fact that you were, I know what I wanted to ask. The fact that you were a musician, was this a book you wanted to write before the other book you wrote? I was going to ask what it's like to write your second novel, but I think the genesis of this book goes back
This
before
book is
the
my
other.
first novel. Yeah, it had a 20-year gestation. I feel sorry for its mother who had to carry it around all those years. No, this is definitely my first book. And it had a lot of iterations. I definitely revised it once a year at least for 20 years, sometimes twice a year. And characters who were more center moved to the side, and characters who were there went away. It changed a lot, but this still feels like a first novel to me. It's just weird. I think I'm not unusual. Also among writers, it's a very, very common story.
Yep.
Yeah.
Did you come back to it in a new way after actually publishing a novel? Did the revision at that point?
Yes.
How did that change?
Yeah, I did a lot. I think that as writing is you have to teach yourself as a writer. I mean, you can take classes, but writing is really putting yourself in the chair and practicing. It's kind of like viola. You have to practice. So by the time my first book came out, I did some very, very intensive revisions. I went through and took out all the treacle, by which I mean, like so sickeningly sweet and saccharine. No, that's not going to work. I did one treacle edit. And then I did some other edits, and I expanded some scenes that needed just to give both the characters more humanity and not only focus on music.
How much of it got changed after the first book? I mean, was it like just a revision, or was it a fundamental reconception?
It wasn't a fundamental reconception, but it has a lot of new scenes and characters. But what changed is like nobody would notice it is the goddamn beginning, which I think I've written 3,000 times. And I couldn't live with it until it was actually in galley. And then I finally figured out what to do. It was really late. Beginnings and endings are really hard. And that beginning was, yeah. That's a new beginning. What can I say?
Well, starting at a graveside has a certain finality to it. You kind of combine beginning and ending in one thing there. In a way, there's this very romanticized picture of music in that you have these very strong musician figures. You have Adam. They're all very successful. They move in this rarefied air, contrasting with your heroine, who is a violist who quits music. But the heroine's friend, Lily, who never quite gets a break, was she a more central character before? And was it your intention to show what a life in music actually looks like for 90% of musicians, if not 95%. Lily is freelancing. She's picking up gigs. She's playing for kids. She's playing for dance recitals. And
she's actually based on somebody that I knew as a child, and I think her life was very, very typical. That she was she's an absolutely marvelous pianist with tremendous, tremendous power. She's a small person. And, it just happens. You don't always make it to the top. And so I feel like she's pretty realistic. I was very interested in this book and conveying what it means to be a musician and what's real, and that's real. I took ballet as a child, and I never understood that we had live piano. This woman, she was Chinese, her name was Lydia, and she was an incredible pianist. I had no clue. She could do anything. She never had music, and I think she must have been one of these pianists, probably, right? Who had a probably very promising career.
Right. Well, for me, that also brought up the idea that we don't value people who don't make it to the very top. I remember getting a criticism from some angry reader at some point saying, Anne Midgette is a failed violinist, a failed recorder player, a failed singer, and a failed Orff instrument player. He had gone through some bio and picked out everything I'd studied as a child.
It's generous.
And I want to know what the successful Orff instrument player looks like, because... But there's this idea that if you're not doing it professionally, you failed, rather than how wonderful that as a child you studied many things. And
and this is a good time to put in a tip for the amateur music world. There's a huge, live, incredibly vivacious amateur music world. It's huge in this city, but all over the world. You can bring your instrument all over the world and find a group to play with. So absolutely.
Yep. And amateur orchestras as well. And
yeah.
I know the Baltimore Symphony did that Rusty Musicians program, and amateurs came and played with the Baltimore Symphony, and a lot of them had never been to the Baltimore Symphony because they were too busy playing their own instruments, which the professional music world often doesn't realize, that the amateur music world is very happy with what it's doing. It doesn't just want to make pilgrimages to it.
No, that's really true, really true.
Yep.
This might be a moment to say that when I was in law school in Boston, I played weekly with most of the math department at MIT. I don't think you could get a tenured position at MIT unless you're a good classical musician. They were incredible. We played piano quartets. One of them played piano and cello. And the violinist turned out to be this world-famous mathematician. I have no idea what, because I wouldn't be able to tell you, but he was an absent-minded professor, I might say. He showed up one day to rehearsal and said, "It's my birthday, I forgot. My wife is in a rage, and I'm sorry I have to leave and have my birthday." Okay.
Truth of amateur musicians. Was it your intention at all with this book to make a sort of plug for classical music? We're at a time when classical music is very active, but audiences are shrinking, and there's a question about really the institutions more than the music. As you say, amateur music is probably more healthy than a lot of the orchestras that we're propping up. Were you trying to sort of put in a plug for classical music?
Well, I'm really interested in demystifying classical music because it's really beautiful, and you just can listen. You don't have to have a favorite something. You don't have to know anything. It's just beautiful. So I really cared about demystifying it and making it accessible. But I also wanted to pull up the curtain, because behind, what you see in the symphony with everyone dressed and in line and playing beautifully is a really, really lot of blood, sweat, and tears.
The Mozart in the Jungle look.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I think that making Brahms' Opus 60 into a sex tape is pretty brilliant. She needs to get the Spotify list out there, because...
Okay, yeah, will do.
Did you have models in your mind, or did you listen to a lot of duo piano literature? Because duo pianos is not that common a combination, really.
Yes, I did. And it so happened that we had a family friend whose mother and his mother's sister, so his aunt, were a duo piano team. And they were really basically hot stuff in the 1950s. And they were twins, I think. One of the twins got multiple sclerosis, and it ended the whole career. So the very first thing I did was interview him about what he knew about it, and the symbiosis between two musicians. And then I listened, to a lot. Yeah, it's a huge repertoire. I love it.
Who did you listen to? Who were the...
I knew you were going to ask me that. No clue. It was 20 years ago. I mean, I can tell you the music. There's beautiful Rachmaninoff music. There's the Mozart two-piano concerto. And I didn't know, I played the Brahms piano quintet. I had no idea that it was written for two pianos first, which I did. That's the order. A late reader, while the book was in galleys, corrected that. I had it. My original version was that the Brahms Brahms himself transcribed the piano quintet for two pianos, but wrote the two pianos first. I'm like, heaven forfend. We got that mistake before it went into print. So a lot of the music I could type Poulenc. I didn't know Poulenc had written, so I couldn't tell you the performers.
Right, right. No, I'm curious about that. The name of the book is Duet for One. And of course, I immediately thought of Victor left alone without his duet partner. But you really center that title around Adam, who's sort of looking for his duet partner. What was the meaning of that title? And did that title change as you wrote the book?
Yes. I feel like I have to do this in public now that my husband, Dan Becker, is the generator of titles in our family. So I want to give him a shout out. He had, when this book went out in 2005, it was called Duet for Solo Piano. And so that tells you that Victor was really the center of the novel. Then I had it as Duet for Solo Violin, and then I realized, I don't know if Jane's here. She will be here soon, Jane Stewart. Jane, you're here, violinist, editor extraordinaire. Jane is one of my best readers. She said, you really should call it Duet for One because they're two duets. Right. So shout out to Jane and Dan for helping me out here.
I think that's smart because I think a lot of readers might have read past Duet for Solo Piano. It might just sound normal. Yeah. You know, you might not realize where Duet for One, you get that, wait a minute, there's something off here.
It's really a double love story and a double oneness.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
No, when you even work it into the chapter, there's a chapter that sort of centers on it.
Yeah.
But, well, we're about to open up for questions. Is there anything else that you wanted to address before we do that?
I want to talk about the concept of time, which I think is a fixation. Please come up to the microphone. This is being live streamed, so if you have questions, if you could stand up over here, please. Yeah. I worked a lot with time in this novel, and I had one of the many things I did revising it was trying to get the order. It's told very out of order, and I want to make sure that would be comprehensible. But also, time is really important to all musicians, and time is important to all humans, but it operates on different levels. So that's another theme that I was interested in exploring.
And that is sort of the penultimate moment of the book when you bring in the composer to talk about time and the philosopher talking about time and the way that music is the art of time.
Yeah.
Great. Well, if anybody has any questions, please come up to the microphone. Don't be shy, but we can go right on talking if you don't.
Gotta break the ice.
This is my friend Tom Rosensteel. Thanks, Tom.
So the idea that you've got a book in your head for 20 years, kind of mind-boggling, unless you're a writer. Fundamentally, what changed over that time period, would you say, about the book?
So a lot. Thank you for the question. A lot changed. The biggest change was moving Adam to the center of the book and realizing this is Adam's story. And then the second way in which it changed was I had two different agents vying for this book in 2005. And one of them said, I didn't go with her. One of them said, this book feels like an outline. I'll sign you, but you've got to do more. And I didn't really know what she was talking about. But another huge change was it was too much like an outline. I had to fatten up everything and fill in everything. I mean, the concept was there early on, but it took a lot of filling in. Hi.
Thank you so much for sharing. It's amazing that you're both a writer and a musician. I didn't know you played the viola. So I'm just curious if your experience of writing a novel is at all similar to your experience of practicing the viola, and if outside of the substance of the book, where music is so central, if it influenced the form of your writing at all with tempo or speech or timing and just kind of your relationship being a musician and being a writer.
Thank you. Well, 100% yes. What I said about my teacher, Max Aronoff, is that he really taught me how to practice, and every lesson that he gave me was completely relevant to anything, to law school, particularly to writing, which is such a long haul effort. It takes so long to write a novel. It takes long to publish a novel. So definitely the discipline of practicing was 100% part of this process.
I want to ask you about power And in the first book, you also talked about power and the power of a teacher over students. In this book, apparently I haven't had a chance to read it, but as you said, the importance or the power dynamics of the music teacher. And I was wondering whether power in the teacher-student relationship manifests differently if you're talking about training the body in ballet versus the musicality of that relationship, and how power is similar in that arts training of music. And
Thank you. I think it's the same power, and I think a lot of music teachers abuse it. I was very blessed to have a music teacher who was extremely physical. Like, he wanted you to hold his forearm and feel like, actually this forearm, feel like it felt like to use the bow. But Curtis, I mean, we all know Curtis is undergoing this spectacularly awful predatory sexual harassment scandal with Yasha Brodsky, who was the first violin in the Curtis String Quartet. I mean, they're being sued. So yeah, it's around just as much. And Laura, a very famous violinist, Laura St. John, has brought this to the fore, and it's really ugly. I think I was just really lucky I didn't have that experience.
There's a little bit about your book that's a love letter to Philadelphia, so I thought you'd talk about that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Well, Philadelphia is our hometown, and I went to school in the nearest and western suburb. But unlike many of my classmates, our family life was really focused downtown. My father didn't want to ever have to drive to work, so we lived near a little commuter train station. And I was downtown, at least in high school, 5 days a week for orchestra rehearsals and practice and lessons, chamber music, music theory, which I was still failing then and did later. But so our life was focused in Philadelphia. My father was a native Philadelphian, absolutely loved the city. So it is a love letter to Philadelphia, and I appreciate that. And I also feel like a lot of the public doesn't understand what an extraordinary musical town Philadelphia is. It's really a world center of music.
Martha, young woman mentioned that it's unique that you're a musician and a writer, but I would like you to talk about your transition. You mentioned you were a lawyer, but your years in social policy and activism and how that informs your work, and also about, can I do a plug for your email newsletter where you not only talk about writing and such and interviewing, but also where people could make donations to the anti-Trump forces.
Thank
How's
you.
that for a plug?
Thanks. Thanks, Anne. So I was really privileged to have a job at the Butler Family Fund for 26 years. It's a family foundation that came into a corpus of money sort of accidentally, and they hired me to run it in 1993, and it was a job of a lifetime. We were focused on housing and homelessness, and also criminal and racial justice and anti-death penalty work. And some of you in the audience are people I've worked with. Thank you for being here. So I don't know what to say about the connection. I'm still trying to figure it out. But I do want to say that was an intensively writing job. I did a lot of writing at that job, and I made it into a writing job, and I always wanted to be writing there. And also, when I started writing fiction, I had this very generous board of directors, one of whom just spoke at the microphone, who allowed me. I was able to come out to them. So I was like a little bit nervous. But they were actually some of the earliest readers of this book, so I was incredibly lucky to be supported by them. But I try to keep social justice work up in some capacity still. Any other questions?
Do you keep that newsletter separate from your literature, or is your newsletter the Martha newsletter
No,
for all of
it's the Martha newsletter. It's my Substack. And after Darth Vader came back, I felt people were so hurting and so frightened, and the only way we're going to address the horror show that's going on is to really stay together and work together to change things. So I've just kind of devoted half my letter to that. It wasn't my intention. It's more about music and books usually. You could welcome to sign up. It's under my name. Hey, Mary Kay.
Hi, I'm so excited for you. I cannot wait to read this iteration. And
Mary Kay, I think, read it in 2004.
It was a little while ago. I know it. But I recently heard that art decorates space and music decorates time. And I really love that. And I know you as a musician and a social justice worker, and also as a voracious reader and a writer. And I sort of want you to talk about that music, decorating time, and also your love of literature.
Thank you. Well, I think my dad told me that this is a Goethe quote. I'm not sure that it is. You might know that architecture is frozen music. I don't know who said that, which I love that. So music is really, really core to who I am, and I listen to it a lot. Although after my run-in with this horror show of a teacher, I had a time of silence. But it's like so imprinted on me. So I played amateur music for a long time, and in the Fairfax Symphony here in town for a lot of years. Always want to be listening, but I had to learn when I was writing. I couldn't have it on because the first few drafts of this book were sentimental drivel. It is so emotional for me that I now write in silence. I can't have any music going on. But I still love hearing live music. I mean, music is really, really important, and I think it's core to the human condition. Like music, we all do music somehow, some way. It's just part of who we are, no matter what age we live in. As to my voracious reading habits, I don't know. I don't remember a time when I couldn't read, although I know when I learned to read, I was not an early reader. I learned in first grade with everybody else because I remember learning vocabulary words. But there are all kinds of habits that I have that I didn't recognize as being a little weird. Like, I know when I learned every vocabulary word that I learned, like I remember who it was that taught me, and I would keep like lists, you know. And the same with classical music. My parents bought me a radio in 7th grade, and I just memorized the classical literature, another set of lists. So I don't know. But I love reading, and I feel like, I'm lost without a book, basically. Actually, 3. I usually have 3 going at a time. Mary Kay is a wonderful writer, by the way. So you should check out her stuff, too.
Just one quick question.
Yeah.
Did you listen to specific pieces when you were writing that you were writing about?
Yes, and it was a terrible mistake. I mean, I just couldn't. No, I was just so emotional when I talk about taking out the treacle, about just sentimental drivel coming out. I mean, it was terrible. I mean, but it took me like 2 years or something to realize how bad it was. I was so emotional. So now I write in total silence. And I mean, we live in an apartment now, and Dan has his office like 20 feet from me, but like my door's closed, and I don't talk to him all day. Like, I have to have silence, you know? So, hey.
Hi, Martha. I am so excited to read this.
Thank you.
But I'm already sad that I'm going to race right through it, and then, I'll be done with it. Which leads me to my question of, so we've had ballet and music. What's the next, Martha Toll?
I'm always worried this is really bad luck, but I'll just knock wood. I have a 3rd novel that is almost ready to submit, and it does concern a painter, but I don't really think it's about painting. It wasn't intentional, certainly, but it's basically about a girl who gets stuck in a painting. So it's very surreal, and it's not like anything else I've done, I don't think, but it's not even ready to submit. So thanks, Rima. Hey, this is my sister, Betsy.
Hi. I was going to full disclosure. I'm one of Martha's 3 sisters who are all here tonight. So congratulations, Martha. Super
Yay, thank you.
exciting.
Yeah.
So I appreciate the last question because I have an easy question. I have a hard question. So the easy question is, I noticed that a lot of the musical was described in metaphors that included food and taste, which I was interested in hearing more about, and wonder if there might not be a food book down the line after we finish with ballet, music, or painting, and then maybe food. And the second question is, the same 20 years that took you to write this were also the same 20 years almost in the book that took these 2 adolescent characters to make it to adulthood. And I'm wondering, when you write about something that is reminiscent of one's life during the adolescent years with all of the weirdness and pain and emotional things that happen then, how does the passage of time help you readdress those things, not be shy to share them with your family or friends or yourself? Or how does time allow you to revisit things at unusual moments in your life, I guess is the question.
That's a hard one. The first thing I will say is that I have a secret novel in the drawer that is the food novel, but it's never coming out. It really had it was about a food writer, and it had a lot of food in it. So I just need to say that. I mean, I think that I'm not a revenge writer, even though I have a lot of fury at this viola teacher, and I'm also don't believe that writing is therapy. It is for some people, and I support that, but I don't write for therapy. But I think you learn to know yourself better. Writing is an self-exploratory process, and so I think you learn as you go, and then you get these ideas, and you don't know where they came from, and then you're like, oh, I actually thought the same thing 20 years ago, and I forgot that I wrote it. Like, what a great sentence. And then I go back and realize I've written it 20 years ago. So there's some like echo chamber, I think. But I think it's a healing process. And I also think it's a way to get to know yourself better, to understand, if you're taking a look back, the trajectory of your life. So
I would add one thing I didn't get to ask, but you changed careers and have recently become a writer relative to the arc of your career. Did that mean redefining yourself, or have you always been a writer to yourself?
Well, I didn't recently become a writer. I recently got published.
There
So
you
that's
go.
that's a really big difference. And I think there are probably a lot of writers in the room who might share that sentiment. But I left the Butler Family Fund in 2020 and realized that most of the world had no idea. I didn't know anything. They knew me as, I ran a family philanthropy. Like, you want to ask me questions about the death penalty, I'll be happy to answer. Very comfortable, But this whole artistic side hadn't gotten out there at all. So I just didn't talk about it when I was in social justice. But it turns out that there's an incredible amount of overlap. Looking at my friend Scott Hampling back there, he's a marvelous cellist and the most important, public utilities lawyer in the country. There are a lot of us out there. There are a lot of us out there who are musician writers, or, it goes painter. Our late friend Bill Bennett was the first oboist of the San Francisco. He was a beautiful, beautiful painter, and I don't think anybody knew that about him. So it's not that uncommon, I think, that we all have several sides of ourselves. Yeah.
Sure. But the difference is now, what I meant to say is not that you became a writer, but that you began a writing career.
Yes. Well, yes and no. I was working as a critic starting in 2010, and that was really difficult because that was really hard to have a job and do criticism. I always felt like I was in a train wreck, and we were raising 2 children. Eventually they went to college, but it was really hard. It was really hard to balance that. But so I had some traction as a critic, which was good for me, mostly for my mental health, that somebody was paying me to write something, because fiction didn't go anywhere for a long time. But yeah, it was a big redefinition, particularly here in Washington, D.C. I had no time to get to know the writing community here. So it's been really wonderful to be able to go to book readings and sit down with people and get to know. There are a lot of writers in the room, and most of them I didn't know before. Yeah. So, any other questions?
Well, then I would say thank you for such a lovely evening, a lovely book, and thank you for letting me be part of it.
Thank you.